My last OCG Banlist video was so well received, but it was a bit strange since the ultimate point of that video was that the last Banlist was not very good. I really think if we're ranking every format of all time, last format ranks among one of the worst. I only entered 3 tournaments all of last Banlist, but pretty much every complaint I had about the last Banlist is completely fixed in this one. I'll just say it, the OCG is completely saved. For reference, I am a competitor, so I like to focus on the top meta decks, and as a result, I'll probably look at this list through the lens of Snake Eyes, Tenpai, Daizioru, Runic Stun, and Memento, and I'll probably not really talk about any of the things that I don't have much knowledge about. So for the bans, it's just Beatrice, and it's so beautiful. Every single problem I had with the Fiendsmith engine was basically just Beatrice. Like, if we're being honest, a 1 card Link 2 body and a rank 6 or face up negate is strong, but when you compare it to some of the other cards we're seeing right now, like any Memento starter, or Snake Eyes Ash, or Diabell Star, comparatively, it doesn't even seem that crazy. It's really good because it's non-committal, it has good follow-up, it's a very efficient engine, and it's highly splashable. But the result doesn't actually seem that fair if everything resolves, unless they're doing some black technology with Beatrice. If your hand can play through what the Fiendsmith stuff produced, then you still couldn't hold your defense for the real starters because Beatrice might FTK you. You have to hit the Sequentia every time. Now you can reasonably use your hand traps on the best part of their deck, so this is obviously an excellent change, and when I was making predictions with my friends, my wish list was just a Beatrice ban and nothing else. Now if you look at the limits, they have completely eviscerated Snake Eyes and Yubel. I don't even think either is playable anymore. Last ban list, I had some friends in the TCG tell me that Snake Eyes was unplayable with 1 Ash, 2 Bonfire, and 1 Wanted. I had commentators tell me that Snake Eyes wouldn't be good anymore. And this time I actually feel like Snake Eyes is dead. They hit absolutely every single starter without exception. It's 1 Ash, 1 Poplar, 1 Bonfire, 1 Diabell Star, 1 Wanted, 1 Fiendsmith, 1 Tractus. Like, I don't even see how this can still be playable. This is a tier level murder. Like, they can't just play one of each of those and only have 7 starters. Even if you start counting additional starters they could play like Sanctus, it's just not enough starters for the deck to function. Like, personally, I would rather them just ban Flamberge, but this is actually even better because it just also consistency hits other Bonfire decks like Daizioru, as well as every other Azamina deck. Yubel, to be honest, I'm a little surprised that it hit so hard because Phantom to 1 would already be a massive but deserved hit. Because Phantom kind of has a Colossus problem where it's a good endboard card, except you could also use it as an extender because the summoning condition was so easy. And Phantom also protected you from hand traps, which Colossus didn't. So now it's like you can only choose one of those options. And then they also lost all the Fiendsmith stuff. Or they could still do it, as in they make Moon during their actual lines in order to get into the Fiendsmith stuff. But it's just that their deck is so much weaker to hand traps now. Like, imagine if you just summon a Samsara D Lotus, and then that just gets ashed. I'm not even really sure how to extend past that easily. Like, you would have to have a 0/0 Fiend and a Yubel in your hand to make the Phantom. You have to link those two in order to get into the link 2, or you have to hard draw the Fiendsmith stuff. I guess Nightmare Throne also does it, but you would have just activated that first to get into Phantom. It's just so much harder for Yubel to play around hand traps now. So to be honest, I don't even feel like Yubel is that playable anymore. It was already kind of mediocre because it was bad into all of the strong hand traps except for Nib. Nib was the only one it was actually good against, so it's a bit sad for the anime fans, but Yubel ended up being a rather uninteractive deck, so I think it's probably for the best. Now the last thing to talk about is Chandra, and yes, I know, I am a Tenpai lover, so I am biased, but I really think this is a perfect way to make the deck more fair because the biggest issue with Tenpai as of last format was that there's way too many turn skips in the game. So you were much too likely to do nothing if they had one of the turn skips. And that hasn't changed too much, but what has changed is that they are much less likely to play through your hand traps if you're playing the fair ones. Yes, they can still kind of ignore the turn skip hand traps, but the fair hand traps may just stop their turn. Because an issue before was that any dragon in the Chandra demanded a 3 hand trap response, which is just so unrealistic, and if they had the field spell, you just died. And now there's only one field, and there's only one Chandra, so most games you're going to have ways to interact with them. And that means that you're just playing normal Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, to be honest, I could see this deck still being strong because it can still support Dominus Impulse, which is one of the best hand traps ever. It plays the most non-engine in the entire format. When its play resolves, you die instantly. But I don't think it will come close to its results before the ban list because you can actually interact with their play too. For semi-limits, I'm only going to be talking about 3 cards. The first one is Pankratops. I actually love Pankratops, and it's one of my favorite cards because I feel like Pankratops is both a fair going second card that is also highly flexible. It will basically just play through every single floodgate, which is why I like it so much. The issue with Pankratops to me is that I feel like this is sadly not that relevant, but it's becoming a growing trend in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now that no one seems to be talking about. except I really do not like how they keep printing these battle phase skips. For example, Nightmare Pain, Cranium Burst, Voiceless Voice Barrier, and then the Malice Field spell is another one. The battle phase is already not that relevant in Yu-Gi-Oh! Before, you would either use it to pretty much either one, kill them, or to clear some interrupts so you can try to clear the rest of them in main phase 2. So they already took something that was already not that important, and then they made it even less important, which is why I feel like Pankratops loses a lot of power. I do think it's still a pretty good side card though, because a lot of people are on the 3 Solemn 3 anti-spell technology post board right now, and Pankratops is quite efficient into those cards. The next card I'm going to be talking about is Opening. I know Branded is super hit, and it should be okay for them to get stuff, but Branded is just one of the lamest decks of all time. Like, it should be cool, because it's a big engine deck that is flexible, and the interaction and the board it puts up is decently strong, but that's not actually how it plays in real life. In real life, it's just a puppet simulator. So until they ban Puppet or Branded Expulsion and Sanctifier, it will always be my least favorite deck. So the last thing about this is just Maxi. I don't really have much to say about this one. Maxi to 2 is obviously excellent, because 2 is less than 3. So that means it's going to be used against me about one less game every 10 games I play. I said this last video, I think, that Maxi was definitely not getting banned on that ban list, and I even think that it's definitely not getting banned on the next ban list. But I think putting Maxi to 2 makes sense given that the tactical tridecks give new players to Maxi, and they can kind of use this as like a litmus test as to whether or not they can ban Maxi in the future. For the Unlimits, the only thing I'll say is that Raigeki and Lightning Storm to 3 is maybe a bit scary, but it's also kind of the same because if you wanted to play a breaker-focused deck, you could just play some Dark Holes and it's like the same thing. And then there's also a critical mass of breakers you have to play or else you draw too many. And in that case, I don't really think that these going to 3 really changes too much. Lastly, this is completely not relevant, but PR Lee is actually one of my favorite decks. And hilariously, my Fiendsmith PR Lee deck is completely untouched. Or almost untouched because Beatrice got banned. So I might be playing around with that next format because my deck was 3 Luries and only 1 man, 1 girl anyways. Will it be good? Probably not. The Fiendsmith stuff was quite a bit worse now that Beatrice can't send Delicious Memory, but I'll probably be playing around with it for a bit. So for my final thoughts, the meta is completely saved because honestly, there's a lot of cool decks right now, but they're just completely gatekept by Snake Eyes and Tempai. And if they just ban Snake Eyes, then Yubel would already be pretty tough for these decks just below them. So hitting Yubel is also, as a preemptive hit, is also a really excellent idea. So I'm really interested what ends up being good next format. I really don't think Daizyoru is as good as its results show. I think that it was a deck that played through Fuaros, it could play a lot of non-engine, and it could make a good enough board even through most hand traps. I could give a more in-depth answer about my thoughts on Daizyoru, but I think that the summary is that I don't think it's that strong. Some people are probably thinking that since it had the best results before the ban list, that they just murder everything below it. It must be Daizyoru tier 0 next format. But I really don't think so. If it ends up actually being tier 0, I'll be completely shocked. The real question is what the common non-engine ends up being, because people are all maxing all the turn skips because they were so efficient. But I could see fair hand traps coming back if people just all start playing Centurion or something. Tempai is also much weaker to the fair hand traps, and people may be incentivized to play more fair decks because the turn skip hand traps are so strong. But just from a preliminary option without digesting the ban list, I think Memento is definitely the best deck. I think that Daizyoru will be a strong deck, obviously. Runic Stun will be strong. I'm actually rather concerned that they never seem to hit Runic Stun on any of these lists because it's clearly always playable and also no one likes it. Honestly, Malice could also be good. I think that Daizyoru was going to be better before I learned about them, and I thought that Malice was going to be worse because Malice is like 8 starters, 8 extenders. That could also be starters, so you get one shot by one hand trap a lot. But after murdering Snake Eyes and Yubel, that's a lot of decks. So relative to the field, it might get better because a lot of decks will get one shot by one hand trap. And then the board they make is actually quite ridiculous as their starters resolve. And I do feel like that there's going to be some Tempai sneaking around. Everything else that ends up being good is probably some unexplored deck is my guess. There's a lot that I wanted to play around with, but never had time to experiment. So stuff like the new water support or some Azumina Whitewoods hybrid, but all in all, this is one of the best ban lists in Yu-Gi-Oh history. I think that Konami did a fantastic job, and I'm so excited to play the next format.